Yes. There you go, Ken. Be free.
Yeah. All right. Are you? Have you unmuted me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So everybody can hear you now.
I want to make sure that I can share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see your screen too.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
okay.
we can see your screen.
There we are. Okay, even better. All right.
23 people so far.
3, so, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So expecting more.
2 weeks ago, I had 1,000 and
oh my goodness,
100 people trying to get in the room. So this is 3 is great. Hopefully, we all stay here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So to everybody who's joining us, we'll be getting started shortly. I'm not sure what time it is. I can't see the time anymore. Yeah, in about just under 10 minutes. So
great.
Make yourself comfortable. Make sure you've got some water and be prepared to ask questions. And
yes. Now, can they? Yeah.
Oh,
got a hand up there.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Okay, thank you. Who is Katie?
I'm Katie.
Katie, hi.
Hi.
I missed the last webinar. It was on Thursday, and for some reason I was thinking it was Friday. And the other problem is I'm in New Brunswick, and so I thought 3 o'clock was my time.
Oh, these time differences.
So it's good to be here today.
Yes, yes.
Ken, how are you?
Good, good. Yeah, welcome. Yeah.
Good. I have your book right here, one of them.
Here we are. Fantastic. I'll sign it for you. Yeah.
So is everyone from Ottawa?
No, we're from all over the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in Montreal, and I work with an online university based out of Los Angeles, but I'm Canadian from the West Coast. Yeah, living here now. We just moved in July.
Oh, I miss the West Coast.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely.
16 years in Vancouver and Vancouver Island.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. I started teaching secondary school on Vancouver Island 100 years ago, and so basically went from there. Yeah.
Where at?
I actually ended up working at a secondary school in Victoria, working at Spectrum. That's one of the schools. But then I ended up at the in prison at the juvenile detention center. Worked there for a year and a half. Yeah, which was
a friend of mine in Toronto did that for many years.
Wow. Yeah, it's soul destroying work. Yeah, I admire anybody who can do that, but it's I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore. Yeah. Part of the impetus.
I don't want to take up all the time here because there's some other people on. So
no, it's a good opportunity to chat. We still have a few minutes and things like that. So you're in New Brunswick now, yeah?
Well, I just returned. I teach at Ottawa, and we were released 5 weeks ago. So I've been home for 5 weeks.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
I travel back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think some people are just not knowing what to do with themselves, and some people are busier than they've ever been. I'm ending up doing tons and tons of work. I've been spending all week and weekend working on an adaptation of a series into making a prototype for online digital learning, an ebook basically. And it's working with Nearpod for the first time, and it's just it's challenging. Yeah, so. I think for everybody.
Using Zoom is going to be challenging for me.
Yeah.
I hadn't used it before.
Yeah, it's all getting used to new things, but teachers are by nature adaptable. We're good learners to begin with, and we certainly have the strategies to do so. So yeah.
I'm just looking in the chat box here. We've got people from all over the world, literally all over the world. So from Edmonton to Egypt to Paraguay, California, and then of course in Canada from New Brunswick to Edmonton to Nanaimo on the island.
Montreal.
And Montreal, of course. Bien sûr.
How do I get to the chat box?
So if you go down to the bottom toolbar, so if you hover
Right.
over the bottom and you'll see chat. Yes.
Okay. And that way, oh, there they are. So Zoom group chat.
And I see somebody there having ice cream, I think. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. We've actually, that's one thing I have, the first time I used Zoom was we've had a few family meals. Actually, I have a sister in Ottawa and nieces also living in Ottawa, and then in Vancouver, I've got a slew of relatives. And so we all made the same meal, and then we all sat down at the table and ate together. So it was really fun. Yeah. So,
and the same meal.
Yeah, well, we sent out the recipe ahead of time. We all made the same meal, and now we're doing the same thing. I told, once you tell somebody else about it, it becomes a thing. So one of my best friends lives in Konstanz in Germany, and so he and his family are going to make I think the Chinese dumplings we're going to make. So he's going to make dinner, and I'm going to make lunch here, and we're going to do it at the same time on Sunday, this coming Sunday. So yeah,
that's a great idea, especially in times like these.
Yeah. Well, what interests me is actually with all these things, what will endure? First of all, what's new? What's different? What's a different art form? For example, like these choir pieces we've done with hundreds of people all singing in different places. I think that'll be an enduring outcome of this. I mean, I'm sure people did it maybe beforehand, but it's first I've heard of it, basically. So I think that's pretty exciting. But the Zoom meals and getting together, I think for me personally, that's something that will last. And a lot of people are going to be saying, sorry, we're having a meeting. I have to drive for 2 hours to come for a 1 hour meeting. Why is that? And they definitely want to say, no, let's just do this one online. So I think the possibilities are becoming available to people. So, yeah.
Well, come September, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen.
Yeah.
As to whether or not we're going to continue teaching online.
Yeah.
But for the last 5 weeks, I was teaching online at 2 institutions.
Yeah, it's going to be it'll be interesting. We'll see. Yeah. I
do
think
free now though.
Yeah, I think students are liking the online course, and I think a lot of courses are going to move to blended. So a lot of students will just say, really, why? I mean, already I know my own sons during the last weeks, they had a lecture, and I said to one of my sons, I said, oh, how was your lecture this morning? He said, oh, I didn't go. It was recorded, so I was just going to pick it up at 11. I thought, really? You've got to get out of bed, go to your courses. And this was before the virus, so I think that is going to be changing a bit as well. Sorry, I just need to turn off the dishwasher. Anyway.
Okay, and while we're waiting for Ken to turn off the dishwasher, we'll be getting started here in just a minute. So I'm going to have everybody on mute for the duration of Ken's presentation, but feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of Ken's presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ken Beattie, TESOL professor at Anaheim University, but has taught and lectured all over the world in language teaching and computer-assisted language learning as well, and as well as authored and co-authored a number of best-selling textbooks. So Ken's going to be talking to us today about formative, summative, and illuminative assessments. So I'll hand you over to Ken. Thanks, Ken.
Katie, and thank you so much to Katie. And first of all, I have to start off with thanks to Katie and Pearson. So Pearson is sponsoring this today. So thank you very much, Pearson, for putting this together and organizing it. We're talking about formative, summative, and illuminative. And everybody says, what's illuminative? So I'm here to explain it to you. So thanks so much for coming for this today. There will be a copy of the video from after today if Katie's sharing this. And then also, you'll also be able to, I'll send out a PDF of the slides. So if you're going and you're trying to write down something, say, I missed that one, then don't worry. The slides will be available to you afterwards, so we can send those out. At the very end, I also give you my email. So if you have any questions, you want to just talk about anything else afterwards, or continue a discussion or share some ideas, I'd love to hear from you. And I think one thing we found in these times is everybody has some time to chat and spend a little bit more time. Evidently answering those those awkward sort of telephone surveys, evidently that's a big thing now. People enjoy doing it. I've also done something else. As I mentioned, I just moved to Montreal last July, so I take a lot of photographs out in the street. So I put in a lot of graffiti. So some of the visuals are specific to the topics that I'm talking about, but the rest is just eye candy, something for you to enjoy as we go through this. Okay, let's go on. So assessment, what exactly is it? Well, it's changing, and our attitudes towards assessment have been changing enormously. Especially in the last 10 or 20 years, in some places, not so in other places. When I first started university 100 years ago, it was quite different. It was quite different. In my first classroom, my first day looked almost exactly like this room here, which is a picture that I just pulled off the internet. But I went to UBC, and my first degree was in geography. And when I was there in my first class, Dr. Mackay walked in, and he looked up at us, and there was about 300 students crowded into the room. He said, by the end of the year, probably half of you won't be studying geography anymore. He said, after 4 years, there will be 20 of you left. He said, 20 years after that, there will only be one of you practicing geography, right? And we're all in tears, crying our eyes out there. No, but it was just like so depressing. And the way he presented it was like all our fault for not being able to learn. And that has been a kind of a paradigm shift in education over the past while. We no longer expect students to sink or swim. We no longer see students as people who just, if you're not good enough, you're going to fail. Instead, we have the new ideas about it's the teacher's responsibility to help the students in every way possible to ensure that everybody can pass. Students don't go to university today thinking, oh, maybe I'll pass, maybe I'll fail. They don't. They really enter university expecting to pass, and if they don't pass a course, it's never their fault. It's always the teacher's fault. So they come to expect a great deal more of teachers, and so they should. They're paying for an education, and we should be ensuring that they pass. But as teachers, we have to question the experiences that we've had and how we are influenced by the ways in which we have been assessed in the past. So as we're going through this, try to think back and think, what were your good assessment experiences? What were your terrible assessment experiences in different ways? And how can we turn those to our advantage somehow? So I can start off with this one question is, will your students be flying space shuttles or driving cars? All right. It's a ridiculous question. What do you mean, my students flying space shuttles? Well, of course, very few will. Maybe one. The idea is this, though. When you're training somebody to fly the space shuttle, it's $1 billion car, right? It's $1 billion vehicle. And so you want the best of the best, as they always say in those action movies. They want somebody who has the absolute top skills to do that, and they have to compete against everyone and everything to get to that point where they could be the pilot of that space shuttle. What about driving a car? Not so much, right? Everybody should be expected. It's expected that almost everybody can drive a car. You might have to take your test a couple of times, take some extra training on this side. If you fail the first time, you can take it again. There's one of my heroes is this, as somebody who personally failed my driving test 3 times when I moved to Hong Kong. Technical, difficult test. But this one woman in New York, she took the test 37 times over the course of something like 50 years, and she finally got it. I thought, what a menace to society. But what's interesting and analogous to language teaching and learning is this idea, is that when we learn to drive a car, we get better. I learned to drive a car when I was 17, and I improved. I'm a much better driver now than I was when I was 17. Why? Because I was out in the world, I was using the skill, I was practicing it, I was refining the skills that I needed very personally to be able to be a better driver. So how does that work exactly? How does that work exactly in terms of language? Well, when we teach students language, we don't expect them to walk out of the classroom and say, oh, English, I know it. I'll never have to read a word of English again, or I never have to speak it. Of course they do. They're going to be using the language, and through using it, they should be improving. So there we're kind of shifting our paradigm again. We're thinking more importantly than ever before, we need to teach the skills students need to survive. Those survival skills, those self-educating skills, those strategies that they need to learn throughout their lives become extremely important. The shuttle, a space shuttle, you have to know it from the day one. Driving a car, you can get a little bit better as time goes by. So really, if we put this into technical terms of assessment, and I'm putting on my professor hat now, I teach graduate students and doctoral students, but I was also chair of assessment for the higher colleges of technology for the United Arab Emirates. So I sort of had 20,000 students that I was responsible for testing. So that's part of my perspective coming into this. Norm-referenced assessments compare learners to each other. And most of our traditional assessments have always been that bell curve, And when I started teaching in Hong Kong, I've spent 18 years abroad. And when I started teaching in Hong Kong, we had an actual bell curve. I was told you should be getting about 8% failures and 8% A's, and everybody else is in the middle. Really? I'm supposed to fail 8% of my students? I said, I am a wonderful teacher. I'm God's gift to teaching. Why should my students be doing poorly and being judged the same way than the teacher next door who maybe isn't as good? Of course, it was a nonsensical idea. But this norm referenced idea that we can somehow identify the best of the best and the worst, it's persevered for a long time. What we really want is something more like a driving test. And that's where we get into criterion reference assessments, which say, if you're speaking English, you should be able to do this. And these ideas really started to change with the development of the Common European Framework, the CEFR, and now the Global Scale of English, Pearson's own product, which is much more detailed, much more granular. Then it actually gives us a lot more information of whether or not students are able to achieve something and go to the next level. So a set of standards that students, if they can do something, then they can move on. That's got to be our perspective. So how do we assess now? Well, in a lot of ways, you're very familiar with what you see on the screen right now, and that is multiple choice tests, right? Multiple choice tests. Why do we use them? Well, of course, it's because they're easy to mark. True, false, easy to mark. There's a lot of assessment tools that we have, which we really only use because they're so easy to mark, and we're constrained in the time that we have available to do so, or we think we are. But if we prioritize assessment as being, the most important aspect, we're not just going to rely on multiple choice tests. Believe me, that space shuttle pilot isn't doing a multiple choice test to get his license to do that. So what are we measuring exactly? Well, it varies a lot. And of course, we start off at the beginner level, and we're really teaching the phonology or the phonetics, which is the sounds of the language. Can you make those sounds? The morphology is the meaning of little bits of words, like means, sort of a not idea. Then we get into vocabulary or lexicon. That's just the words, the vocabulary, and that's a big part of what we do as English teachers. And we also talk about syntax and grammar, word order. These are, of course, there's many other things you're thinking about. Well, what about punctuation? Where does that fit in there? Of course, there's lots of other things in here. But our final level is at the discourse and genres. And that's really where we're trying to figure out, what is the intent? You have a message, you're trying to express it. How do you express that idea? And we do this in different ways. Now, I speak Chinese very badly, French worse, and Spanish, almost just as badly. But I always joke with my Spanish friends. I said, Canadians only know 4 words of English, 4 words of Spanish. Dos cervezas por favor, right? 2 beers, please. But what I say about discourse is that actually we don't. Oh, sorry, somebody's writing on the screen. Can you please not do that? Can you stop writing on the screen, please? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so discourse, I thought I was going to get graffiti on there eventually. Okay, discourse, what's happening there? It's really what the intent is. And if I say, I wouldn't walk into a pub here and say 4 beers, please, because that's too rude. You'd sort of say, hi, how are you going? How's it going tonight? What would you recommend? A lot of other language, right? So discourse is partly about what we should say to be polite, to be formal, to express ourselves, to express love, romance, anything else. What about general knowledge? What about general knowledge? This is a kind of a pitfall that a lot of English teachers fall into. We teach English through things, through other subjects, and we teach through literature. And I really, really embrace that. I think literature is the key to lifelong learning. A student who enjoys reading will continue reading throughout their lives. But too often we actually end up testing general knowledge. And my first real thinking about this was I went to work at a school in North York in Ontario. And there was a teacher teaching, working with beginner students. And they were international students, many of them refugees. And she taught them Lord of the Flies, Lord of the Flies. Now, I'm sure most of you read it or seen the movie or something like that, but it's a horrific novel, really. I mean, it's essentially a bunch of boys are parachuted onto an island and they create their own social structure, start killing each other and develop this sort of religious, quasi-religious cult going on. It's a horrific novel and it's very complicated language. And yet she thought, well, I'll teach these to these students who basically didn't speak any English whatsoever. And then to test it, she had, these multiple choice tests. And they said, no, they can do it. And I said, they don't know what they're talking about, really. And they did not. I just would pull one aside and say, what does this mean? But they could just, somehow they could do the multiple choice tests and get a passing mark for her anyway, partly the way she constructed the tests. Just to add insult to injury, you have to think many of these students were refugees coming from war-torn countries in which relatives, friends had been killed. And suddenly the first introduction in English you're giving them is to an island where young boys, unbridled, are killing each other. Okay, not a great idea. So we have to sort of think about, what we're testing and ensure that it's the language component of what we're really looking at. Many tests do not test what they should. Many are poor or poorly formatted questions. The question itself is not very clear. And I know, I don't even have to say this, but I know that as I go through this, all of you are thinking of that one test you took in school that you were so angry about because, the question was poor and you failed. Or the question on the material that hasn't been covered. Teachers do this all the time. They have a test for a unit, but they skipped a page or they skipped something or on a test that they used last year, but they haven't covered the same thing. I see it all the time. Tricky questions, a lot of things to try to fool students in some ways, and I don't know why. That's some teachers, think that it makes them feel superior. Opinion questions marked as fact. So, you could say, is it good to kill the whales? Well, of course, you would expect no, and probably get A or something like that for that. But they're quite often their opinions. I do think it's terrible to kill whales, but, just that sort of idea. Impossible questions to answer definitively. They're too open-ended in some ways, and too many questions for the time available. These are all some of the challenges that we face when we're creating tests. Okay, so I promised that today I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm actually going to talk about 4. I'm going to talk about formative assessment, summative assessment, illuminative assessment, exciting, and but I'm also going to talk just a little bit at the end about assessment during the time of COVID-19, because I think that's a big concern for everybody right now. So formative assessment is our first idea, and that's all about raising students' awareness of how well they're doing and giving direction for how they can improve. So the idea of a formative assessment is somehow they're going to get some kind of feedback that's going to help them to improve on their own, not just by continuing on through the course and continuing as they were. A lot of students are quite often not aware of what they're doing wrong. They're not aware of the problems that they're having. And you've all been in this situation yourselves, and many of your students have. They go through a course, they think they're doing great. They get to the end, they do their test, and they're like, oh, I can't believe I failed. And they're not sure why. It's because we often haven't given enough clues as we're going through the course to provide that formative assessment. So any test can be formative. You just don't have to record the marks. But there's another important part to this. So you can give a test to the students and say, okay, let's have a test. Groans, sighs, tears. And then you say, okay, it's all right. I'm not going to collect the marks for this. But they need to see the results of the test. So they need to find out what the correct answers were. And they need feedback on how they can improve. So you say to the student, say, okay, you missed that one. Why do you think you missed that? What didn't you understand? And sometimes that's a reflective thing for the teacher, because you're saying to yourself, oh, a lot of students failed that. It's not because they're bad students. It's probably because you didn't teach it properly. When we create large-scale exams for, as I said, 20,000 students or something, we go through all the questions afterwards, and you can measure a question. You take the top performing students and you say, okay, how well did they do? And which ones did they generally get right? And you look at a suspect question, and if the weakest students who got the poorest marks are getting equally as high marks on that, then you have to question yourself. It's probably the question. So you throw that question out, recalculate. As teachers, we don't often do that. We don't often look at our questions in great detail to sort of examine why are my best students failing some questions that the worst students are getting. It's often because the worst students are just guessing and randomly getting the answer. Okay, so I'm going to use a couple of examples from a series that I've been working on over the past year or so. It's called Startup. It's an 8-level American English series for young adults and adults. It's kind of cool. For me, it's been a very exciting kind of journey working on it, because my own background is in computer-assisted language learning. That's the area that I did my doctoral work in, and I publish in that area, so I continue working in it. And this is a really kind of intensive use of technology that way. One of the things that's really unusual, and we're still talking about the formative assessment, is it has an app. Now, pretty well every textbook series from now on in will have an app. It's coming. Just like a few years ago, it was like a CD, or a cassette tape, and then it was a CD, and then sometimes people had a USB or something that came with it. Then they've got a website, and then the website is interactive, and the app is just the next logical step in that. Having the app, though, is interesting in this one, because it has all of the video and all of the audio from the book, and then it also has quizzes. So the students can go away from class, they go in, you see the little QR code around over here, and with the QR code they can just go to their exercises right away from the page of the book. So it's kind of easy for them. And it's also something they download once, and it's on their phone, so they're not using up their data plan. So it's an interesting sort of thing with lots of different types of activities, matching things and, putting sentences together. And again, they have to rewatch the videos, listen to the audios again, sort of to do that. So kind of an interesting thing, because they can do it anywhere. They're on the bus for 5 minutes, they're waiting for the bus, they're in a bank, just before bed, anything else. You can, the whole idea is not to do it for an hour, but to do it 5 minutes at a time, several times a day. So, but it's formative in that as soon as you do it, the students get instant feedback. Now, this is kind of an important thing when you're talking about formative assessment, is students should get the answers right away. So if you're doing a test in class, you don't want to give a test in class on Friday, say, okay, I'll see you on Monday, right? And you take it home and mark everything, and then you go over it. They've kind of forgotten what they did already. So it's much better. It's much better if they can just simply get the feedback as quickly as possible. So with an app, That's an advantage. They can just get that. Why is it formative? It's because we don't capture the marks. So students can actually just get their feedback, and then they can make a decision. So this was actually a huge, big issue. The huge, big issue that I had to put on my professor hat and sort of pull rank and say, no, I don't want it to go into Gradebook. So they said, oh, we'll just have it feed into Gradebook for the teachers so they can see the students' progress and what they're doing and everything else. I said, don't do that. And they said, why? Why not? And they were so shocked. And I said, well, because what happens is you'll shift responsibility to the teacher away from the students. We want to shift responsibility to the students. And by making the app theirs and something they own, they look at it and they're not thinking, oh, I have class tomorrow, I better do my app on Sunday night at 11 o'clock. They do it all the time because it belongs to them. So of course a teacher can still say, oh, take a screenshot of your gradebook on your app and send it to me. But you don't really have to do that. Okay, what about summative assessment? What are some ideas here? So summative assessment is about helping the teacher make decisions on whether the student is ready to go to the next level. So that can be to graduate, to go from beginner level to intermediate to advanced. It can be to, go to their next degree, anything else. But a summative assessment basically is kind of almost the opposite of a formative one. In fact, with a summative assessment, we don't really have to get feedback to students, which we don't. And at the end of the year, we often give tests to students, and all they get is their grade. They might get some paper returned or something like that, but it's not really as necessary because we're just making a decision on what they did well. Of course, it is best if we can give students the feedback, because then they can learn from it, they can see where they went wrong, and of course they can contest whether or not it was a fair mark or there was some kind of a mistake made. But it's all about shifting students and sending them on to the next level. So assessment for summative assessment, there's many stakeholders and they all have different concerns. And this is one of the problems that we have with creating these types of tests. So we have students, of course. What do students want? They want to pass the course. I have two teenagers, or not teenagers now, one teenager and one in his 20s, one beginning university, one finishing university this year. So, they have different ideas. They want to pass their course. That's a principal thing. The parents want to know that they're learning something useful and that they're working and the work is paying off into grades. Administrators want to make sure that there is, that the teachers are actually teaching what they should so that the grades reflect that, fair grades reflect that in some way. University committees look at a bigger picture in some cases, and they want to make sure that the stature of the university is being maintained by fair grading. Employers want to know if students have skills. That's a principal thing. They don't really care if you got straight A's if you can't do the job. As teachers is a little bit different. It's many of those ones, but it's also a holistic concern for the students. We want to know that the students are doing well, that they are being challenged, that they are meeting their challenges, that they're going to be able to progress in their learning. Publishers also have a big stake in this thing. They look at creating materials that will help these processes and really satisfy many of these assessment stakeholders' needs. Okay, but what challenges are? There's many. When we have a lot of summative assessments, students are often unsure of what to listen or read. So you come to the end of a semester and say, okay, we're having the final test on the year's work. You think, what did we study this year? I can barely remember what I did yesterday, let alone 6 months ago. So students are often unsure of what to listen or read, or what they should be focusing on, even within lectures. And students who go into first year are devastated because they're so used to being spoon-fed and told what to do that suddenly, all of a sudden, somebody who's saying, is lecturing and speaking loud for 2 hours, they say, what should I write down? What are the notes, right? They're not sure. There's a lot of background noise where we give too much information, off-topic things, and then that interferes with students' understanding. The assessment often tricks students. It's something we mentioned all around. It's peripheral to their expectations, where the teacher decides to give a tricky examination to try to sort out the students. My younger son was given a math exam where there was an error. There was an obvious error in the math exam, and he pointed it out. And the teacher told him, "I swear, I'm not making this up." He said, "Well, McGill University has a reputation to keep, and we have to do that by failing some students." So it was an unanswerable, it was an impossible question. The content, the questions, and the answers are sometimes unimportant to students. They don't really see it. In language teaching and learning, if we teach them things, they think, when am I ever going to use this? Then they won't remember. Okay, we have to ask ourselves, is the test a true reflection of learning? And I always think about that 49%. Do students, 49% should they pass or should they not pass? Is it 1% really making a difference? Of course, we have to set standards somewhere, but we always have to question ourselves. Is the test, is the assessment a clear measure or reflection of learning? One piece of help that we have is a lot of professional tests. So again, with this startup, like many books and many Pearson books in particular, there's test banks. Many publishers have these, and use them because they often include things like this exam view, which has ready-made tests. So the series that I mentioned, Startup, every unit, 2 tests. Use one for formative, use the other one as the final test, or the summative one. There's midterms, 2 final exams, and then you can create new exams or edit the exams on the exam view program. This type of software, if pretty well any kind of textbook that you're using probably has something like that. Investigate it and exploit it and see if you can make it work for you. You can take out items, you can simplify items. If it's with exam view, if it has 4 for the multiple choice question, you can make it 3 or even 2 if you want just more or less a binary option there. Simplify it for the classes or add extra ones. Okay, so what do we need to make a test fair? Well, there's a lot of things that go into this. It's a big thing. But basically, the whole idea of a fairness of a test is a student who has studied the course, has applied themselves, should do well. We're no longer thinking in terms of, are you intelligent enough to do this? We assume that if students have gotten into the course, they should be passing it in some way. Otherwise, there's a problem with our initial assessment of letting the student into the course at all. We probably made a mistake. Meryl Swain talked about the idea of bias for best, and that's we should do everything possible to elicit the learner's best performance. A good test proves that if testees do well, then they can do what's expected of them when given the opportunity. But if the student doesn't do well, then we have to question why that is the case. So, for example, again, my older son, he said, one of his professors said, the average for this course is 56%, and that's what it's going to be this year. And I thought, what? Really? How can you randomly say it's going to be 56% as an average for the students? He's prejudging what he wants it to be. He wants to come off as this hard-edged teacher who's, really fails most students. And I thought, really? It's kind of an odd thing. But really, the reflection was on him, not on the students. Personalization is another big issue that's changing assessment now. It's another bit of a paradigm shift. It's the recognition that not all students need the same language. They're not all going to study the same things. They're not going to get the same jobs. So the assessments and the teaching we do as well has to be more personalized to their own particular needs and interests. What are they going to do? So another thing that we do, this is kind of an unusual one, is at the end of the first 4 levels of this series, we have a project. And this is kind of a new thinking, a new paradigm. Now, if you've been teaching for a while, you know that the last page of every unit in every language textbook is the same. It's the review page. And it's usually like a multiple choice quest on the whole unit, and you just do all those questions, and then it shows whether or not you've understood the unit. You get 6 out of 10, you don't really know what that means. We decided that that was like a terrible idea, and we wanted something quite different, a little innovative. So we came up with this idea of instead doing a project. So here you can see there's a couple of questions around Marco's favorite clothing and things like that. He has to describe it. He makes a little video about it, and he describes it. And then, but in doing so, he has to use the grammar, the vocabulary, the context of the unit that he's just studied. What happens then? Then the students are asked to do the same thing. few things going on here. First of all, I should mention that Marco is a second language speaker. So we've got 40 different second language speakers doing this. We hired university students from all over the world with different accents. Why? Because students aren't always just listening to native accents of English. They have to listen to, they have to be able to decode what people with slight accents. So we don't mark them on this right here because we're not assessing that part of it, but we're exposing them to it. But then students have to make their own. It's an interesting process. When they start making their own videos, they do it multiple times. The same reason why you take more than one selfie. You do it, you want to do it better. Then what happens? Then they show it to somebody else, their family members, their friends, and they'll say, oh, you're talking about your clothes. You should put in your uniform there, your football uniform or something. Oh yeah, I forgot that. So they're getting peer editing. And then they finally have to present it in class and show it to other students and present it to the class. So there's a whole thing here, but again, the key point is it is a review. It's forcing them to look at the grammar, to look at the vocabulary, to look at all the structures of the discourse, and to use it themselves in a personalized context. So every student is doing something different, but it's all on the same theme, same idea. So it's an interesting kind of an innovative way. And of course, because pretty well every student I've ever met now has a phone, then at this level, young adult level, they have the tools to take those photographs or do a bit of video. Okay, another idea that I have, that I use, is get students to write their own assessments. What? Get students to do it? So what do? I teach, as I mentioned, graduate students and doctoral students. I say, okay, we have to have a written exam to satisfy the university, multiple choice questions or short answer questions. I need you each to write, 10 questions based on the course. Say, oh, sir, what if we write the same question? Not my problem, right? I say, talk to each other, share your questions, right? So then they all start going through the units, everything else. Sometimes they're organized. They say, okay, I'll do unit 1, you do unit 2. So we all do something different. They go to the textbook and they come to the questions. Then they have to share the questions with each other. They keep talking about them. And then out of that, say 200 questions, I'll pick 50 or something like that, or 25 for the exam. Other professors say, Ken, he says, what are you thinking? They'll know all the answers. And I say, that is the point of education, for them to know the answers. So we're really helping them along this way, because they will share their ideas, and somebody will say, that's a terrible question. I have no idea what that means. Well, read chapter 2, look at it, it means this. So in fact, this peer teaching starts happening because of it. It's a subversive task. I'm doing it not because it's not easier for me to write the test myself. I'm doing it because I'm forcing the students to review and communicate and collaborate in this way. What about marking rubrics? I hate them. I don't care. Maybe some of you absolutely love them. You write them yourselves. I detest them. Why? I can never understand them. I can never understand between, something that is good, very good, excellent. Like, what does that mean exactly? Some of these things. I'm looking here. Summaries, thesis statement, summarizes, it should say, and supporting arguments, and then the next one says the same thing. So it's like, how can they be different, right? Somehow. So it's just, to me, it doesn't make sense. And I know it doesn't make sense to students. For my kids, since they were little, they've been getting these, they never understand it. Here's a different idea. With my own students, I start off at the beginning of the year and I give them a sample paper. I say, this is the best paper that I had last year. Use this, look at this. Say, well, what about the marking rubric? I said, it should look like this, only better, because I'm giving you this free paper. So make it better than this one. And whatever it is, sometimes it's a project. There was a thing where we did these big sheets of, they put together app ideas and things like that. But this forces the students into reading something else, learning something from another student. And then, because I also say, everybody do something different. Oh, sir, what if we do the same topic, right? Not my problem, right? I don't want to talk about it. Talk to each other, figure it out. So then in that case, they're all communicating and they're sharing their ideas. And I encourage them all to read each other's papers before they send them to me. And definitely one person has to read another person's paper. Why? Because I'm not here to be a copy editor. I don't want to see those spelling mistakes. I don't want to see the fact that you've forgotten something. I don't want to be your first reader. Make it another student. You both benefit. Okay, illuminative assessment. Oh, this is the part I was waiting for, right? Okay, it's very, very simple. Illuminative assessment essentially is giving the teacher and the students insights into the teaching and learning process of some kind. It's illuminating what is going on in our classroom. We're trying to learn from it in some ways. So often it's for language, in terms of language assessment, it's an information gathering process. So a lot of what I've done and mentioned already actually feeds into that. If I ask students to write questions for my exam and they come to me and they're terrible questions, I look at them and I think, what are they thinking? Like, what did I miss? Or why would they be saying that? You know, and I'm questioning my own teaching, which is the whole point. It's illuminating what I am doing in the classroom. In terms of curriculum, lesson planning, error treatment, things like that, beneficial activities, getting some feedback from the students on what you're doing. A lot of this can start with some questions. So, what is the best way what should we be doing more of or less of, or something like that? What helped you the most during the course, and things like that. And one of my favorite ones is, what's something a previous teacher has helped you in learning? Like, what's some secret or strategy or special deal you had from another teacher that somehow helped you in some way? All the students you get have already been in many classrooms with a lot of other exposure. And if a student says, well, our teacher used to play this weird game, it's called such and such, and you think, okay, that's adding to your teaching repertoire. So it's illuminating maybe sometimes problems in your classroom, but also pointing directions to something that you could do better. So lots of ideas there. Okay, this brings us up to the final part of the talk today, the unadvertised portion. So this is the question of, how do we assess now? Here I am in a mask that my wife made for me. It's got little dice patterns on it. What's the best way to assess students in a distant learning environment? Well, there's a lot of different ideas out there, and they're quite different. I'm just speaking again of my own sons. Here's my oldest son's. This is what he had to do a computer science exam this week, and I thought it was bizarre. So he had to open Zoom. So first of all, hear the word computer science, right? But imagine how you're doing this. You have to open Zoom like we have here, but you're not putting the camera on your face. You're putting the camera on your work. So it has to be pointed toward the page that you're writing. And so you have to be monitored. So you have to read the questions, and then instead of typing in all your answers, you actually have to handwrite everything and on paper. And then at the end of the exam, you have to take a photograph or a scan of your paper and then submit it. And you have to do that within a minute or two within a couple minutes of finishing the exam. It's not like you can go away and spend another hour on it or something like that. I thought, wow. At the same time, my younger son, as I mentioned, he just finished first year university. And what was one of his exams? This was for calculus, so not hugely different from computer science. Here are the questions. It's open book. You have 3 days to do it. Right? So I thought, wow, which one would you rather do? Which one would you rather do? What is the rationale for doing one over the other? Well, I understand the computer science. They want to ensure that nobody's cheating, nobody's stealing ideas, taking it from somewhere else. Maybe, I don't know, with the calculus. Calculus is really just, in my son's program, who is studying computer science, the younger one, it's part of something he knows that he has to learn for all his coming courses. So maybe they're just giving him a chance to sort of prove himself. And if the odd student decides to cheat, whatever, or talk to their friends, whatever. But it seems a little more realistic about allowing him to do his best. So if we're going back to what Meryl Swain said about giving students the opportunity to do their best, this would probably be an example of that in some ways. How could we assess students? What are some other things that we could do, and other ways we can do this in some ways? Well, I know that all of you will be teaching everything from primary school to university to grad students like I do. And there's going to be different solutions that are appropriate to your particular levels. But there's also the pressure from all of those stakeholders coming in to say, we need statistics, we need marks, we need to know, the bell curve or who failed and things like that. So we need to consider some of those things. But essentially what we really want to be doing, overall and pushing and being the political force pushing this forward is to move to alternative assessments. So traditional assessments are one shot. Okay, you have a summative, for example, one test, you fail, you whatever. Alternative assessment is about constantly evaluating students, and again with a lot of formative assessment. Indirect means it's just, you don't really know what's on the test or whatever. Direct is much more tailored to yourself. Inauthentic quite often because it's just abstract. Multiple choice is not, nobody stops you in the street and says, excuse me, I'm really hungry. Could you tell me where there's A, a swimming pool, B, a cafeteria, C, a library? Nobody says that to you, right? So the whole idea of multiple choice is quite inauthentic. So making tasks which are much more authentic. Individual work, but really when we graduate, all of us work in groups. In offices, we work together. In factories, we work together. So why aren't we working together on some of our projects? A summative, we often give no feedback other than a mark. But with alternative assessments, we're going to get a lot more feedback, timed, speeded, untimed, decontextualized from anything that you would actually have to do in terms of work or something, to contextualize, giving you a real purpose of why you're learning this. Norm referenced and criterion referenced. Again, that's norm referenced is that's flying the space shuttle. We want the best of the best. And the criterion referenced, comparing students, against a set of standards that they should be able to meet. Standardized tests and classroom-based tests. So again, we want to move between these. I know there's political considerations and reasons we do traditional testing, but as agents of change, teachers have to be active in moving away from that. So what do we say? How could we assess students? My biggest thing is we should have students show what you know. Show what you know. Always have students somehow, that's what I say to my students, how can you show me what you know? And they say, well, but was there a test or whatever? And I said, well, what do you think the test should be? So I'm pushing it back to them. I'm trying to build responsibility, but making them aware that they should be responsible for something. If you're teaching younger students, you teach a topic, say, oh, sir, could we do a play on that one? Absolutely. We'd like to do a PowerPoint. No problem. I'd like to write a song. Okay. I'm totally down with all of that, because what are they going to do? All of those great things, they're going to be collaborative instead of competitive. They'll do different things and share and show each other what they're doing. And the assessment itself should be a process. My students right now, it's hilarious because they, again, they're grad and doctoral students. So they've been through years of testing abuse, and they're all, half of them are all late with their first assignment, which was due on Friday. So they're all writing me these, whinging little notes about, oh, could I please have some? And I'm saying, I don't care how long you take. And for me, assessment is a process. If you're half finished your assignment, why don't you send it to me and I'll give you feedback now? And I said, my big aim is that you finish your paper, and at the end of finishing your paper, you publish it. That to me would be success. So let's work towards that. Let's work to how we could get there together somehow. So really, they've passed their test in life. They've got their undergraduate degrees. They've been teaching. They're all teachers. They're doing TESOL. So why bother? Why bother? Okay, so what do we know? It's a lot of information to cover in a very short time. As I said, the video of this and the PDF will be available after the class. It will be sent to you in due time. But basically the most important idea that we have out of today is just question what you're doing in assessments. Question about what you've done, especially starting with that first question that I asked is, how are you affected by the assessments that you have done over time? How are you affected by the good experiences and the bad experiences you've had in assessment? Are you propagating those bad experiences some way? Are you propagating bad experiences simply because there's political pressure from administrators, university officials, school leaders to do so? You really just need to question that. So think about what you know. Okay, so I'm Dr. Ken Beattie, and here's my email. You're welcome to reach out to me, and I'd love to hear from you. And I think we have some time for questions. Katie, are you still there? Yeah.
Yes, okay. I'm still. Thank you very much, Ken. Okay. So I have. So everybody can unmute themselves if they want to ask Ken a question in person. Alternatively, please feel free to write a question in the chat box, and I'll ask the lovely Ken the question. So you have the ability to unmute yourself. So if anybody would like to ask a question. So I noticed, Yvonne, you've unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
You have a pretty utopian vision of student integrity.
Oh, yes.
So I mean, this is a huge issue. We're teaching EAP, and what do you do with things like they're using Grammarly? Like, I don't care if they're using, like, doing a Word document or something and correcting the spelling or take the grammar checks. That's fine, because I think that is the reality of university. But how do you assess and have them use their work with the minimal editing they should be allowed, because they would be able to use that in other classes?
Okay, yeah. So, okay, so if I understand the question is, are they plagiarizing? Is that part of the question, what they're doing?
Well, sometimes it's not plagiarizing. They're using some kind of app or program to make their language better than it actually, like I think, to me, it's not just, they're making their language so good they don't really understand it, but it sounds great.
Oh, really? Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean,
I wish I could do that.
Where can I get that app? I'm desperate. I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, first of all, if there's apps out there doing that, I kind of think that they'll probably continue using them throughout their careers. So they'll go into their first job writing those proposals, and they'll have that tool sort of on their side. So I sort of wonder about that. I guess some things are probably getting them working together in some groups and group writing process, which we almost never do. We're so focused on everybody doing their own work. But if you start putting them into groups, and then they're trying to have to mix voices and share ideas and everything else, then at least they're getting the language learning aspects, because they're communicating the ideas and sharing them and critiquing them and everything else, putting it together. I haven't heard the app sort of question there. I'm quite curious about that. If you know some of those, send them to me. I'd be curious to research it more. But I suppose I know. I teach. I have a series called Leap, Learning English and Academic.
Yeah, we've used it.
Purposes. Oh yeah, right. So, I mean, a lot of the tasks there, they're not as open-ended, but they're not things where students find it very easy just to all do the same task. So, some variation from each other, I suppose. I don't know. That's a curious thing. I think I'd probably think of some other types of writing topics or tasks. One, for example, circular writing. Saying, okay, we're all going to write, like a story or something like that, or it could be a report if it's an academic English one. But everybody writes one paragraph. So you write one sentence or one paragraph, pass it on to the next person. They write it, and they have to continue going around a classroom, doing stuff like that. I suppose writing in class, having some in-class writing, which always seems like a waste of time, but maybe that's a good thing to do, is to say, okay, I want you to write your outline and write the first paragraph and the last paragraph in class. And I want to be looking at that while you're doing it. And that gets them into the shape for doing it. You have to sort of question the students and say, it's partly the pressure of just graduating and, getting into the program that they want. I know that's a huge pressure, but really at the end of the day, they should be learning the skills to communicate in English, in reading and writing, in speaking and writing. So